Yep, looks great.
Cool. Okay, cool. All right. I'm so excited to talk with this group. I looked through your LinkedIn profiles and you all bring so much to the table here. Really excited to talk about something that, you know, is an inevitability, managing issues and crises in our organizations. You know, it's a time for us to be able to step up in our discipline and show the value that we bring to organizations. And so looking forward to going over some of the material with you. We're a small group. And so I would really love to make this very participatory. You all have a lot of experience to bring to the table as well. And so I'm happy to walk through the materials that you'll be tested on. But also I would love to hear your perspectives and your advice in these areas. So maybe Jake can help me manage Lisa. You know, if someone's got their hand up, you know, we definitely invite you to speak or just jump in. The group's not too big, but would really appreciate the perspectives that you all bring to the material as well. I think it'll help us all learn a lot more. All right. So a bit about me. So this is a picture of me in probably 2003 or 4. I was over in Iraq for a year, serving a tour as a company commander. And this was at the Iraq-Iran War Memorial in Baghdad here. So it's just a kind of a different take on me than everyone's used to seeing. So I thought I'd share that with the group today. I started off at a PR firm in New York, cut my teeth there and learned a lot from 2 great partners who own the practice, who are still in business today. I also served in the Army Reserve for about 15 years. And, you know, in addition to the tour that I just told you about, I was also a qualified public affairs officer. So I went to what's called the Defense Information School, which is basically a PR, public affairs school for all those in the Defense Department that work in the public affairs discipline. It includes all of those things that we do in the civilian sector, and the schools for civilians and all of the uniformed folks who need that qualification. So it was a really great experience. Once I came home from Iraq, I relocated from New York to Pennsylvania and was lucky to get a role as the director of communications in county government, which is really cool because, you know, you think about, you know, you're working for the elected officials, but, you know, you have a host of responsibilities. You have a health department and you can see all the challenges that might, you know, arise from H1N1 flu or, you know, those kinds of issues. We had a prison, we had a parks department. You know, there are so many different departments that are helping the community there and so much to go wrong. And so it was a pretty busy assignment there. I set my sights on earning the APR and did so in 2008. And so for those of you who this might not be your first bite at the apple, stay with it because, you know, things happen in life and you get derailed a little bit, but which happened with me, but it was something that I really wanted to do for myself professionally. I found it very rewarding just to go through the process and I learned a lot. And so I earned that in 2008. I moved on to a civilian position in the DoD. So I was the chief of corporate communications for the Defense Logistics Agency. And so this was an organization that purchases all the stuff the military uses. And so you're working a lot with you know, civilian vendors and the corporate sector. Had a couple of things also. I got to work in issues on this assignment, and it was really great because for me, I was a civilian, but I was able to still be in that military environment. So I enjoyed that assignment a lot. Just prior to where I am now, I worked at Aqua America, and this is a publicly traded water utility. And so this was the first time that I was working with investors and analysts. So it's a great experience there. During that time, I decided to go get my master's and I attended the Newhouse School from Syracuse University's master's in comm management. And it's just an absolutely exceptional program. It works with the business school and a couple of the other schools in the university. So it's a really nice well-rounded program that allowed me to have a hybrid option where I went to campus a couple times a year, and then I also did a lot remotely, and this was way before the pandemic. But because I had family and a job, it was a really nice option for me to be able to balance everything and earn that. And now I work for an organization called AD, or Affiliated Distributors. And it's a buying group. If you think about Home Depot being this giant distributor of industrial and construction supplies, our members at AD are all independent, smaller businesses that are doing the same kinds of things that these big boxes are doing. And by bringing their buying power together, we help them thrive in the market and kind of stay alive and do really well. And so it's been a really cool assignment. I got there, and 5 months later, the pandemic started. So it's been really interesting to work in the practice at a new job in a completely new segment. Lisa, what's so funny?
I had the same.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me and my spouse both started jobs in February of 2020.
Yeah. So everything you thought you were going to do, you had to pivot. That's all good, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all good. Okay. So, I mean, as much as we like to plan and think we're really good at anticipating, issues and crises are going to happen. They're inevitable. So really what I want us to focus on tonight is how we can prevent what we can prevent and what we're in control of preventing or minimizing, and how we respond, because this is so important to the reputation and the perception of the organization and your character, and how you'll come out on the other side of it, is that navigation in between when the trigger point happens and when there's closure. And so tonight, the KSAs for this test are going to cover 3 things. So the first is going to be issues and risk management, which we'll talk about. Then we'll go into crisis. And then we'll talk a little bit about the responsibility to act as a counselor to your leaders. And, when it comes to issues and risk, none of us do have a crystal ball, but man, if you sit and think about it, you think about the things that could go wrong, that are, likely to go wrong, there are things that we can do. And you're listening, right? You're listening in the environment, you're listening on social, you're listening in the media, you're listening to your call center, you're listening to your folks in the field. There are things that you can do to not only identify those things that can go wrong, but really plan to either stay ahead of it or minimize the impacts of it. When it comes to crisis, it's more than crisis communications, right? They call this crisis management for APR because it's really a strategic role that we have, being a strategic partner to the organization when things really go bad. And then finally, counsel to management. This is not for the faint of heart. I mean, man, it's really hard to stand toe to toe with your CEO if, you've got some hard, look in the mirror, man advice. But this is something that is a responsibility of ours. And so we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through. So let's first talk about issues and risk. So there's a lot of content here that I want us to think about tonight. Really important as we go through all of these items is to think about the necessity of relationship building with your leaders, with your business line leaders, with influencers, with employees, when the waters are calm, because, if you understand what everyone's role is, you guys are all on the same sheet of music and understand what the goals are when it comes to this. Then when you need to put this in place, it becomes that much more easy because you've gelled as a team. Everybody understands what they should be doing. You've talked about it, you've trained. And so, this is, right now, if your organization is in calm waters, it's a good time to have the conversation. The other thing I want to say about this is it's really important to understand who owns issue and risk management in your organization, right? And because it can differ. It can be you, it can be counsel, it could be operations, it could be the CEO. I mean, whatever the decisions are, but it needs to be really clear in terms of who owns this, so that everybody understands who that incident manager is, or the project manager for the issue, and then everything kind of falls into line from there. But if there's no clear ownership, find out who owns the issue management process in your organization. And I think there's good argument for it being PR and communications, in my opinion, but it's different in a lot of different organizations. So first, the goal is here to identify and prevent potential or issues that are emerging. And we do this by listening, right? It requires a lot of scanning, a lot of staying plugged into the organization, you staying plugged into those areas that are kind of closest to the ground. So whether that's the folks in the field, whether it's your salespeople, whether it's social or media, the union reps, I mean, whatever the case may be, everyone's organization is structured differently and organized differently. So the goal is for you to be able to identify who those key people are who can kind of give you intelligence so that you can build the environmental picture for you and for your leadership. And issues arise when there's a gap between what we are doing in whatever situation it is and what our stakeholders expect from us. And the problem with these issues and risks is that they could prevent or delay us from achieving our goals as an organization. And so sometimes that means reputation, sometimes that means bottom line, but this is something that can really get in the way of what you're trying to achieve as an organization or with a project. And some of these are really large scale issues. Some of them could be very small, but regardless, they have the potential to have a pretty significant impact. So as we're going through managing issues and risks, part of this is about figuring out, what the probability and potential is for that risk. We're probably not preparing at AD for, a nuclear attack on our building. I mean, it's just not on the radar. But what we could prepare for is some type of member who leaves the organization and starts putting content out there, talking about how they weren't treated well, right? And so, these little kind of sensors that go off start building a picture. And you've got to figure out in strategic conversations with all the right people in the room, what are those things that could really happen to the organization, that are probable to happen to the organization, and then build plans around those. And the extent to which PR can play a role in that, picture painting, it depends on leadership's willingness to include you in the process. Sometimes you've got to wedge your way in a little bit, get your elbows dirty. But it's really important that PR and communications is part of this process, right? Because I guarantee if they haven't included you, when something goes down, you're gonna be one of their first phone calls. And if that hasn't already happened to you. And so, one way or another, you're going to be in the room at the table and having these discussions. And finally, here on this slide is to design and deploy a strategic response that is stakeholder centric, right? So it's not about the organization. It is about those who could be impacted. And I say here, issue management's a team sport. You got to collaborate. When I was doing this at Aqua, we had 30 people in the room. We had a representative from all the states we were in. We had counsel, we had HR, we had operations, the chief operating officer. I mean, the group is pretty big, but, you will miss something. There will be a blind spot if you don't have representation from the organization present when you're building these plans. So I'm going to pause here. Any questions or comments? Anything to add from anyone in the group? I would love to hear your comments.
Just a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to the accreditation exam, is this a separate section about issues management and crisis communications? Is it salted into as multiple choice, or these scenarios? What's the way in which we'll be asked about it?
Yeah, Jake.
So, and Stacey, jump in. You did your APR much more recently than I did. I think I might have beat you by a few years, but having taken the APR exam and been one of these reviewers, they get us together sometimes for 4-hour Zoom meetings to review questions. Primarily when it comes to issue risk management, crisis communication management, those are scenario-based questions. And, you're not going to be asked something like, what's the primary goal of issue and risk communication? You're not going to be asked that, but you will be given a scenario, something along the line as, you are the PR director for such and such of an organization. And you get a phone call from a journalist who says, I hear your company's been doing XYZ. And XYZ could be a serious issue, a risk issue, or escalated to a potential crisis issue. And then you're going to get 6 answers. What are the first 3 things you do? And you're going to read those 6 answers. And in the real world, I do all 6 of them. But then you've got to step back and say, okay, consult the crisis communication plan, inform management, verify the story, right? Verify the accusation or whatever it is, whatever those top 3 are that are in this space within the KSAs tested on the APR. So, Stacey, did I miss anything to add to that?
No, I think it's perfect. And, really that's the application of the knowledge. And I think that's the right place for those kind of questions. And yeah, I mean, the reality is, to your example, Jake, I mean, sometimes you do find out about an issue because the journalist tells it to you. That's, always the worst case. It's happened to me for sure. I wonder if it's happened to others as well, but does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. All right. So we talk about escalation here in the first bullet. Even before this, to manage issues, you've got to be aware of what's going on, right? And I just talked about sometimes, you find out externally, and then you've got to get to the bottom of whatever has just been put on your plate. But, to manage the issues, you have to know about them. And so, and like I said before, this is a team sport. So, you've got, depending on the size of your organization, you could be global, or you could be, a small business that's got 10 employees. Regardless, the team has got to understand what the escalation process is. And what I mean by that is there's got to be a defined set of criteria that is shared with and understood by your organization, so that they know, if I start hearing fill in the blank, I've got to let somebody know, right? And so it's, who do you tell about something? What are those things that you're supposed to be escalating? What's the trigger for it? Some things might be, okay, you hear it, record it somewhere, in whatever systems you're using to build those pictures. And sometimes it's, oh my gosh, I have to drop what I'm doing right now, and I'm supposed to call, Bob Smith in the emergency center. Again, this is all going to depend on the systems that your organization sets up, but you've got to train your folks who are responsible for this, who are kind of the, the boots on the ground and the ear to the ground, so that they understand fully, because they're going to be responsible for making sure that when these issues get escalated, they're at the very tip of the spear in terms of the organization's ability to get ahead of something, to stop something that's in motion, to make it better before it becomes, worse of an issue or even a crisis at some point. And so that's got to be discussed in your planning group. And so that's what I mean when I say train staff to escalate it timely. I mean, you can't get, 20 calls into the call center that there's, so-and-so issue with your product. And, someone decides that they're going to go to lunch first and wait an hour and a half, because, by then 30, 50, 100 other people could be affected by it. And so, there's got to be a sense of urgency that's relayed when you're training your teams on how to escalate timely and properly. And so, sometimes that's going to be folks who are out of your control in PR communications, right? It's somebody who's going to be in the call center, somebody who's out in the operational field, your salespeople who are out. But then it could also be your own team where they're, looking at something in the media and you're starting to see a couple of different reports that are signaling some type of trend. It could be the folks on your team who are doing social media monitoring. I mean, man, that is a great place to mine for information and get ahead of and detect issues that are just starting to arise. And so one of the ways that I'd like to offer that you can apply practically to to stay on top of issues and make sure that they are worked to resolution and visible and actionable by the whole team, whichever team you establish, is to create some type of tracking system, some type of ownership to the either the issue itself or the whole issue management discipline. Figure out how often you're going and looking at this tracker, however you decide to design it. I mean, you could use pre-existing software, you could use a spreadsheet that's in Excel. But so long as it's somewhere that folks can get to it, it's live, there's version control on it, that kind of thing. And I'll show you an example of one. I offer it just as an example to illustrate, but your organizations are going to create trackers that are great for you to utilize because of your particular business, the things that you want to have reported up and things like that. But, generally there's going to be some type of issue and description of the issue. You're going to assign priority levels to different things, and again, this is all going to be done in collaboration with your teams, the status on the issue, who owns the particular issue, if there's an owner, whether it needs to be escalated, because sometimes you might just be putting it on the tracker. And then now there's some type of trigger where you're like, hey, we got to let the COO know or something like that, right? The potential impact, any actions that have been taken. And then finally, there will be a resolution. And the reason why this is really important is because you're going to refer back to this as kind of a historical record so that if you ever face it again or you face something similar, you're going to have the answer to the problem, or at least some head start, right? And so it's really important to record that as well. So this is just an example. And as I mentioned, you're going to find something that works for your organization, but the tracker shows whether the status is open, what type of priority. You can see the examples of the things that we're putting here. These are not crises yet, right? This is just an issue tracker. So it's, contract negotiations are stalling. You think that could eventually, result in some type of staff shortage and inability to meet your mission, whatever your organization's mission is. So you're putting it there for now. And the purpose of this is, for people to kind of rally around this. So you're conducting meetings, you're getting status checks, you're saying, what are we doing about this? Is it getting any better? Escalating if it's not. And again, I offer this just as an example. You're going to find something that works for you and your organization, but I highly suggest that you put something like this together because, trying to manage it by email it's very hard to detect when things are getting worse. And it's very hard to stay on top of it, involving all of the people who need to have visibility. Questions, comments?
I would just say, Stacey, this is a terrific example and a terrific tool. And I don't know how many of you on the line use something in this like, but if you happen to, and let's say the case or the campaign that you're presenting in your readiness review is crisis related, and you have an issue tracker like this, that you can include in the portfolio, that would just seal the deal as far as helping to impress the APRs who are reviewing your documents and who are going to listen to your presentation in the review.
Great. Thanks, Jake. All right, now we're moving on to the fun stuff. Okay, so I'm listing here on the right the types of crises that we could face, right? And we'll go through those in a minute. But what I really wanted to focus on at first is, on the left is, how do you know if something is really a crisis? Because I'll tell you what, lots of people get the hair on fire over all sorts of crazy things that are not crises. And so sometimes you have to ask the questions of, whichever leader is coming to you so that you can help them realize that, the world is not on fire right now. We can get ahead of this. This is an issue. No one needs to freak out. We don't need to have a press conference and invite the AP to talk about this. It's not, we're not there yet, right? And so sometimes it's really being able to be a calm partner when things seem like, oh my gosh, this could get bad. And so we'll go through these, but just keep that in mind, because I know from my experience, I've had plenty of examples when folks have come and said, we've got to get this crisis plan going. And it's like, well, wait a second, let's ask ourselves a few questions first about whether we're there yet. So don't be afraid to be that voice. So I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Jim Lukashevsky. I've worked with him, gone to his training, read his materials, and I've had him come in and give training. He's a crisis guru, and I really like the practical approach that he takes. So you can see how he defines a crisis. This is your operation is stopping, your people are stopping, your ability to produce is stopping. It is about to define your reputation in the marketplace. It's about to create victims, or it has created victims, and it's got explosive visibility. So, I mean, this is just, I thought, a really simple way of looking at it, and really helping you, bounce your situation that you're facing off of this definition and these things here that are listed that we can go through. I mean, a lot of this stuff is pretty intuitive, but, we can get into this because it really does help you decide whether you're still in the issue section, or if you're really in a crisis. And so, some of them are natural and accidental. This can be something as simple as, a hurricane floods your office, and you've got to figure out, how to go about operating, or it hurts someone in the field, in your organization. So natural, accidental, weather related. So technological, this is a failure of systems. So if, you've had some type of system failure where folks are not going to be able to place orders on your e-commerce site, and it's going to affect your bottom line greatly, and your investors are going to get all worked up about it, that could qualify as a crisis for your organization. Confrontational could mean something like a strike, where two sides in the organization are not getting along, and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, Southwest Airlines, comes to a screeching halt over a weekend when everyone else is operating perfectly fine. Misconduct, these are deliberate illegal acts. Financial, legal, regulatory. I mean, for example, regulatory might be something like a water contamination situation where you haven't, your staff, your team has not been following the rules and doing all the quality checks, and now all of a sudden there are folks who are ill, or there's lead in the water. So you can go through these and bounce off of these. Normally you're going to be able to find that it's going to, the issue that's growing into a crisis or has become a crisis is going to fit into one of these categories pretty nicely. Okay. So in a crisis, the first couple minutes and hours are absolutely crucial to setting the tone for how the organization is going to handle the situation, the trust that you're going to build with your publics. This is absolutely crucial, right? If you hide and you don't come out for a couple of hours because you're working so hard to draft the perfect statement, you're going to lose faith by the people who you need to have trust built, so that your reputation can be maintained. Another thing I want to point out is oftentimes you're going to get asked, if you haven't already, can you please write me a crisis communications plan? Well, okay, can you show me your operational crisis plan? And you may get a nice stack of paper on your desk, or an email with a pretty comprehensive plan, or you might get nothing, and they expect you to write a crisis comms plan. Well, the comms plan has to align with the operations plan, because you're writing the comms plan to be able to support how the organization handles the crisis operationally. So they have to marry, and they have to complement one another. And then the other thing is to act and communicate appropriately, ethically throughout, right? I mean, nothing is going to crush the reputation faster than, making it about you, or not telling the truth, or being forthright. Now, there is a way for you to stage these things so that you let the right stakeholders know in the right sequence, but always counsel to act ethically. I mean, I'm sure that some of you may have faced situations where it's, well, let's just try and say something different than what really happened. No, because it really comes down to your own personal reputation as well, and you're upholding a standard from the PRSA. And so, of course, that's just very important. It's human nature to want to kind of like stick your head in the sand. but an organization's character is going to get defined when crisis comes. Questions, comments? Okay. Just jump in whenever you guys want. So types of crises that are covered in your KSAs. So there's 3. Sometimes they kind of sway in and out of each other here. Sometimes you can see them that they're kind of like really stacked into any particular type. But I give you some definitions and then some examples below. So an immediate crisis is something that just kind of like slaps you in the face, right? It's the picture that I showed you before in the crisis intro slide is of unfortunately a 28-year-old father of 2 who got into a trench without shoring, and the trench collapsed and killed him. And, this was something that I dealt with when I was at Aqua, which was that water utility. And I would consider that an immediate crisis. It was absolutely awful. And so that kind of makes the right definition for this particular one. Some type of unanticipated criminal activity, natural disasters. I mean, sometimes you can predict when a hurricane's coming, but, other times, things happen that are more kind of immediate and sudden. And as it says here, there's not a ton of time for research or planning, which is why it's really important that you have those crisis plans and discussions and training and exercise in advance, because, it's going to come upon you so quickly that you're not going to have time to start from square one and start writing this stuff. You have to know what to do. Emerging, this is kind of like where the issue grows into a crisis, right? So the organization is aware and should be able to kind of eliminate the crisis because of the measures that you have in place that you've talked about. You can see regulatory noncompliance, a discrimination complaint. Usually these things, there are signs and signals that the organization should be reading that, can be dealt with. And then safety violations is just another example of some type of emerging crisis where, there's kind of this trend that is building that, you should have been able to get ahead of. And then sustained, there's ongoing negative news coverage and attention on it. It can also come from an immediate crisis. All 3 of these can really cause lasting reputational damage, but the longer that people are talking about the crisis that your company is involved in, the more opportunity there is for the reputation to just get whittled away. And it's harder to come back from. At a situation where one of our state subsidiaries had a really bad lead problem because in one of the communities that we served. And it was because there was a mistake made in the treatment process. And, I don't want to get into the technical details of it because frankly, I can explain it, but I'm not, a scientist to be able to go into it in depth with you. But the bottom line is that there was lead sent into people's homes over a period of time. And it took years for this thing to get resolved. And it was awful and ugly, and people's health, was affected. And it was just, Jesse Jackson came out to, the community and held a press conference. This thing just, the issue needed to get fixed, and the science wasn't, getting behind it. And so it just caused this huge, long, sustained crisis. These are things that are really hard to deal with, and, not just because they have reputational and financial impacts, but also it takes a toll on the team, right? And that is why it's really important that you build depth into your plans. You can't be on a 24/7 cycle, for more than a couple of days before you wear your team out, and you're not going to have a team in place. Let's see, there's something in the chat. Oh,
Stacey, we have a question.
yeah, great.
Yeah, I noticed that you have immediate, emerging, and sustains at the kind of levels of crises. But I was wondering, how does media coverage, because I noticed sustained is only on the ongoing negative news coverage and attention, but could you be looking at something that you think is smoldering, but then it becomes a media story, and then it switches to immediate then?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I guess the question is, how does the media change this rating of what kind of crisis you're facing?
Yeah, so I don't know that, I wouldn't say that these measure severity, right? I want to make sure that, I kind of lay that out, right? These are just kind of categorizing and defining the types of crisis that can happen. But I mean, an emerging crisis or an immediate crisis, sustained crisis, these could all be damaging. The media could be all over them, so these definitely don't measure any kind of level of severity. Jake, would you say anything additional?
Absolutely. And I have we were just doing case studies last night in my college class. A perfect example, Penn State. Nobody knew about Penn State was immediate to the public, but it was emerging on the institution with Jerry Sandusky, went from emerging to immediate to sustained, boom, like that.
Yeah,
Covered all three.
that's a good example. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Great. No,
I'm-
thank
I'm
you
in
for-
the process of creating a crisis communications plan now. So this is very timely.
Oh,
I have created one for corporation before where I worked, but now I'm with government and it's completely different because of the different partners and the reporting structure. So this is very helpful to broaden my thinking about this.
Oh, great. And thank you for pointing that out, because it's a great point. It's an important point. And good luck with your plan. Let me know if I can help.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay. So the team, this is important. And certainly I'm giving you some examples of who should sit on the team, but you're going to customize this based on the type of work. If you're a government organization, you're going to have different folks than you might if you're private sector or publicly traded. But this should give you some type of clue on how to get it started, right? So and sometimes it might depend on the situation, right? You might have a full team that's defined with 25 people who are your crisis team, but if it's not a regulatory issue, you may pull out the regulatory affairs person, and let them do their day job, because they're really not, they don't need to focus on this particular crisis, just as an example. So you can plug and play with some of these roles. As I said before, ownership is really, really crucial. I mean, you have to have somebody who's in charge, right? And so that's got to get defined. And if it's not, make sure that you get clarity on that. The PR leader, and then a media relations person or spokesperson. Sometimes in a small organization, those two might be one and the same. But if you're able to have some type of PR and communication leader who can stand back and look at the bigger picture, because there's going to be a lot of activity happening, that is ideal. Someone who's monitoring media and then speaking for the organization. Monitoring team members. So this is going to include those who are under your purview, like social folks who are monitoring the media and the web, but also, like, for example, your customer call center. So you might need to have somebody from your VP of customer service or something sitting on the team as well. Someone who can be concerned with community relations if it has to do with some type of geography, customer relations, as I mentioned, regulatory affairs, as I mentioned. You always want to have counsel, even though you're going to fight like hell with them. You got to have them there, because they're going to, make sure that you don't step out of bounds on anything. It's really important to build a relationship with your chief counsel or your outside counsel prior to something happening. I had a really great relationship with the previous one when I was at Aqua, and we were able to really understand each other's issues. We were able to bring them, come to compromises. He was just really, really great to work with, and it's because of that relationship building prior to something going wrong. And then HR, no matter what kind of crisis you have, whether it directly impacts your associates, your employees, they need to know what's going on. And so having someone there from HR can help advise on how your plans are going to be impacting associates, but then also too, they can help shape communications and deal with the specific stakeholder groups inside of the organization. And so establishing the team in normal operations, as I've been saying this whole time, and then plan for depth, because, when I was at Bucks County and we stood up our emergency operations center for certain incidents, like, we had lots of flooding, for example, in the county, and we would be in that emergency operations center for days. And, you just, you want people to be sharp and making good decisions and having clarity. And so you've got to be able to send people to bed. You've got to be able to send people to go eat. And so, if you have a team, if you're fortunate to have a team, everybody needs to be trained on how to run the function in a crisis, because you're going to need to tap out and like have some sanity. And that's perfectly good. If you send a spokesperson out to a mic who hasn't slept in 3 days, it's going to be very evident. It's not going to go well for the organization. So plan for depth on the bench. Any comments on this?
Just one quick thing, I think
yeah.
for the exam and the materials you read, the textbooks you read, the practice test you'll take, things of that nature. They're gonna try to trick you. They're gonna try to trick you in some way, shape, or form as to who's that face of the organization in a crisis. And Stacey alluded to it earlier in the presentation. The CEO is the face of the organization, and we all know that we all play a role in crisis communication management. And there are times when we are that person with the news media, or issuing the video releases via YouTube and social media. But the test is going to want to make sure the CEO is that face of the organization.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because they have accountability and responsibility. Ultimately, that's exactly right. We had a situation when I was at Bucks County where, very unfortunately, there was an error made in the 911 center that delayed dispatching help to a woman who was disabled and had been smoking in her bed, and there was a fire, and it was absolutely awful. She ended up passing away. And, our county commissioners had never, ever dealt with anything like this before. And, we really had to advise that they needed to be the ones at the microphone for that. I mean, that was just the mistake that was made in the call center was absolutely preventable. It was, inexcusable, and they had to take responsibility for it. And they were scared, and they were nervous, and they were hesitant. You've got to prep properly, but you're right, Jake. I mean, that is just so crucial. That call as to who's going to stand there is defining in and of itself. That's really good. Comments or questions on that? We're moving on. Okay. So building your plan, as one of our friends on the call is doing right now. So in times of calm, plan to make the plan, right? And that has to be in conjunction with the operations crisis response plan. And it's really actually kind of a fun exercise to sit in a room together and figure out all of these worst case scenarios and how you're going to react and respond, and who needs to be involved and who needs to know. And so, just make sure that you're being realistic and, what is likely, what is most damaging, and really focus on those priority scenarios, because man, like the list of stuff that could possibly go wrong in this life is endless. And so you kind of have to put it in the box sometimes. Some of those discussions can get a little kind of lengthy, and kind of, the roads are never ending. So it's helpful, to try and focus the organization and the group on those things that are priorities. You can go back to kind of like second or third tier concerns, because you're not going to be able to get everything done at once in these initial sessions. So I encourage you to focus on the priorities, establish those priorities. And then what systems are going to be needed, what operations are going to be affected, what processes that you follow are going to be affected or need to change in the scenario. All those considerations have got to come into play in these discussions as you plan. And then what are the possible impacts to the priority audiences that you establish? So who are your priority stakeholders? You got to identify those, obviously, and then what kind of impacts. The other thing to consider here in that second to last bullet is, as you stratify those audiences, those stakeholder groups, put yourself in those shoes and answer the questions. What are they going to want to know? How are they going to want to find out? who is the person to deliver the message? And so, those questions are really, really important. And then finally, how can you most effectively communicate both within your organization and beyond? If you're planning on having your Black website go up, and you're putting up notices on the Black website to a community that has lost power, that's probably not going to work for you for a long time, right? So you've got to find other ways of effectively communicating. And so these are questions that you have to ask your organization. It depends on the scale and scope of your organization. If you're global, you can't go door to door letting your customers know, but there are ways to plan for these contingencies that you're going to face if something goes wrong, and it is really important that your audiences find something out. So just consider that not only is it important to identify those priority audiences, but you've got to make sure that you've got the right channels set up so that they can receive the information. And to set those expectations. So, for example, as you are working through these plans, if there's a way for your employees to know, hey, if we ever get into these type of situations, you're going to find out by text alert, and we're going to test the text alert next week or something like that, right? So setting those expectations is also really good. And so as the crisis unfolds, right, identifying these stakeholders, we're going to tease this out a little bit more, as we started to mention it on the last slide. So of course, your employees, your governing bodies and boards, investors, analysts, customers, specifically to any victims, any survivors, if things go that way, your regulators and elected officials, also to your vendors and partners and suppliers, the media, obviously, any surrounding communities that need to be notified as well. So this list is going to be created by you and your organization in collaboration with all the folks who need to be in the room to determine these important stakeholder groups. So not only is it important for you to identify these folks, but then too, it's just like, who's the right person to go up to the mic and talk about this publicly? Does your CEO need to get on the phone and call the Public Utility Commission or the governor? Sometimes an email is not good enough. Sometimes that contact has got to be made personally. If there comes to victims and their families, you work with your counsel, but it's about doing the right thing and being empathetic and putting yourself in people's shoes. And so, sometimes the messages can be delivered in mass, on a social post or on your website or via email or text alert. And sometimes, in order to preserve the reputation and the relationship, you got to pick up the phone and make the phone call. And who is the right person to do that? All of this should be discussed as you're working on your plans. It also too depends on the severity and how the essence of time is playing into it. I mean, clearly, if you need to get something big and loud out, I mean, the media is a really great tool for that. Even somebody who has a crank radio can hear the news and get instructions if something goes wrong. I see some chat. Yeah, so Tony Ann, you want to come on and talk about that? I like the comment you made, and I'd love you to share it with everyone.
I know from prior experience that sometimes if there's human harm, that having a bureaucrat or a politician talk to the family can do more harm than good. So it is either somebody on the staff that's trained to do that, or having the family speak with a counselor or somebody else who's one, won't say anything insensitive and won't get hackles up at all. And that's particularly important when there is human harm or fatalities.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really important. And it is important for customers or your external stakeholders, but also too for your employees as well. So consider both of those. So thank you for raising that. That's great. Really important. All right, we're moving on. Okay. So the do's and don'ts. So best practices. So focus first on the things that we encourage you to do. Be proactive, timely, and truthful. I mean, you've got to gather what you know and then say what you know and be truthful about it. So the essence of time is really crucial. When I was in grad school, I did a study on the Amtrak crash that happened here in the Philly area, and just a study on how long it took for them to come out and say something officially. And it frustrated people, and it caused harm, and it caused lack of trust. And I mean, man, there's a lot going on in a scene like that. My husband actually got called to it because he was working for them at the time, and he was in emergency management. But I mean, you've got to get out there and you've got to say something, and you've got to be empathetic, genuinely empathetic. You've got to put out what you know, and you've got to let folks know when they're going to get more information, because otherwise folks create workarounds, and you want to be the source of truth. You don't want others, organizations, or opposition to be the source of truth. So you want to own that, and in order to do that, you've got to take control of it early. Assembling the crisis team. So again, you assemble a team that's already been structured and identified and trained, and they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they know what roles they're supposed to be performing. And so that's why it's really important to do that prior, when the skies are blue and everything is great. You got to get your arms around, the who, what, when, where, how, and why, right? I mean, it's like that old journalism question. So that's, you've got to get your arm around that. Folks are going to be a little panicky sometimes, and it's okay. Just hold on a second. Let's figure out what we know, right? That's a really good place to start. And maybe what misinformation is out there, what disinformation is out there, and kind of laying all that out, because it's something that you got to get ahead of. Work with the team to consider your actions and options at the time, and then message it, right? I mean, that's what we do, is make sure that we are communicating effectively with good information, with instructions on whatever the situation is. It's got to be clear, and it also has to come from a unified voice. So, you may have to rotate spokespeople, or send different folks out, but and especially if you're working in some type of joint information center or emergency operations center, it's really important that everyone has a unified voice, because from your own experience, if you're hearing, 3-4 different organizations saying different things, you don't know which way to turn or who to believe. And then it just causes distrust, and people are making, decisions that are not well informed. And, sometimes that can affect safety, and it's a really bad road to go down. So inform audiences with a unified voice. And then, as you go through, because things will evolve, you'll learn more. You've got to be able to be agile and monitor the situation, and make adjustments and recommend adjustments to your organization. So those are the do's. The don'ts. Don't speculate. I mean, I'm sure you guys all know this already. I want to just put it out there to emphasize it. Don't speculate. Don't hesitate. Do not try and evade or minimize the situation. Again, it's all about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Do not make it about you. Everybody remembers the BP CEO who just wanted his life back. I mean, oh my gosh, that's just, you can't make it about you. And when I say you, I mean like your organization. Don't deflect blame or attack others. I mean, if there's been something that's gone wrong, there's got to be a level of ownership and accountability, because really that does, as much as it's, as much as the lawyers are going to say, we don't want to state that we've done anything wrong. I mean, the consequences of not being forthright and trying to deflect blame are just so much worse. And so these are things that you're going to be advising as you navigate through. And like, obviously, never. And then in all cases, you want to learn from the experience. So, something that I really advise doing is, when the smoke has cleared, you conduct an after action review. This is something that I took from my Army experience, and it really does help in any kind of organization, is to take a second, sit down, and figure out what went right, what went wrong, how can you make it better next time? you know, you've got to be able to learn from the incident, no matter how severe, no matter how preventable. Take a second and learn. You know, as I said before, not every situation is a crisis. Even if it is, it's legit. Be the voice of reason and calm. There's going to be lots of folks who you're working with who have never gone through something like this before. And, you know, you've just got to be that voice of reason and calm. And it really is an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. You will eventually get a call where you're going to be asked to come into the loop and provide counsel. And it is crucial that you provide your most candid and strategic advice. So before we transition into this last short bit here, any additional comments or insights that you'd like to share on crisis? Okay, cool. Excuse me. So counseling management. As I said in the beginning, you know, sometimes it's really, really hard to go toe to toe with your CEO. These folks can sometimes be scary, and they can be kind of unwilling to hear feedback. For the most part, though, I gotta say that if you do it in a tactful way, not in a room of 25 people, sir, I think you're wrong. I mean, you've got to find the right opportunity, but to counsel management, be tactful. When you talk to your executive, who, you know, in whatever kind of role you report to that leads your organization, it's really important that you bring perspectives of the stakeholders, because I can't tell you how many conversations that I've had where I ask the question, have you considered what X group is going to think if we do Y? And there's a pause. Well, what do you think? Then you can be free to offer your opinion about that. And it really is always an eye-opening discussion, right? You've got to bring the perspectives of the stakeholders into the room, because largely the folks in the room that you're going to be having these discussions with have one vantage point. And it's from the top, it's from a leadership vantage point. And, you know, a lot of times they've never been in the shoes of the stakeholder groups. And even if you haven't, it is your role and responsibility to bring those views to executives as you're counseling them. You have to be willing to have difficult conversations, to disagree. Now, you know, listen, you can give your best strategic advice. And then when the decision is made, you've got to be a good soldier, and, you know, as long as it's ethical and moral, you know, you got to get on board and be rowing in the same direction. But it is important that you be willing to have a tough conversation, share a hard perspective, and help that executive see the world through broader eyes. All right, guys. I'm so excited for you. I wish you a lot of luck in your pursuit of your accreditation. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions or welcome your comments to your peers. And I'm also very happy to get in contact with you if you have questions or want to bounce anything off of me ever. And I'm so excited for you, and I wish you a lot of luck. I think that's big.
Stacey, thank you. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate you doing this for us and for volunteering your time to help everybody in their journey towards the APR. And I have it on tape. Thank you for your service to our country, my friend.
Oh, you're so nice. Thanks for your support.
Anytime, anytime. So folks, we're going to transition unless there are any additional questions for Stacey before she jumps off. She does have another commitment this evening. We're going to transition and talk about public relations, ethics, and law. Are you folks getting the full screen, I hope, and not all the notes and everything? Okay, great. So we'll talk tonight about ethics and law. It's critically important. It's a significant portion, both if you combine them both together, a significant portion, percentage weight of the APR exam. And before I start, when we used to do this in person, I would do the ethics part, and John Moscatelli, APR fellow PRSA, used to do the law part. And I just want to give a public thank you to John for developing all this curriculum for PR law that aligns with the KSAs. It was relevant a couple of years ago. It's still relevant now. So bottom line, end of the day, there are two specific resources that I strongly encourage you to take a look at and review. One, the PRSA Code of Ethics, and what I'm going to offer on the ethics discussion is going to be complementary to what you'll see in the Code of Ethics. And then two, the Associated Press Style Book and Libel Manual. Why? No, you're not going to get any questions about does the comma go in or after, before or after the closed quotation mark. But there's a terrific write-up on communication law in the AP style book that is particularly applicable and very useful for background information and knowledge of communication and public relations law, even though it is the Associated Press Style Book and Libel Manual. It's for the Associated Press, but it does apply to public relations. So those are the two particular sources I would encourage you to take a look at. All right, so here's how it all ties together. Now, all of us have a personal sense of what is right and wrong. Those are our morals. We apply those morals through ethics, and laws are the reflection of society's ethical and moral values. Ethics specifically is that value system we each hold. It determines what's right and wrong, fair or unfair, just or unjust. And there are 4 building blocks to ethical decision making. As we know, you need to have a commitment to the truth. You'll see that in the PRSA Code of Ethics. You make a promise, you keep a promise. So many people's reputations have been, and organizations' reputations have been damaged because they make a promise and they don't keep it. What are our loyalties, our lives? And I think that the critical part here, at least from the perspective of a APR panelist or from taking the exam, is that as an APR, you're expected to have loyalties to both the organization and the public's, audiences, constituents that organization serves. You have to be the person in the middle as an APR, and a commitment to doing the right thing. You'll see in the PRSA Code of Ethics very strong language about commitment to doing the right thing, practice ethically. So I share these principles with you. You're not going to see these principles in the Code of Ethics, but I think it's helpful just to get a sense of what are some of the ethical principles that are consistent from decision to decision that we make. Some of us may be, okay, I'm a deontologist person, I'm deontology all the way. Others might be more selective. With the teleology where the end justifies the means, deontology where the means are just as important as the end, utilitarianism, which is what is useful, what's right. I skipped what's greatest good for the greatest number of people, Aristotle's golden mean, and Kant's categorical imperative. If it's good for me, it's good for you. What's good for one is good for all. Rawls' veil of ignorance, of course, is where you put the veil on, you step outside of the position and try to look at things from a clean slate, objective point of view. And then, of course, the Judeo-Christian principle, do unto others as others would do unto you. Why is all of this important? Not that you're going to get a question about what's the model that most PR practitioners use to make an ethical decision, but more along the lines of how can this help us as we're reading these ethical questions we're asked on the exam. And that is the 4-step box developed by Potter at Harvard Divinity School, is that you have to have an empirical, objective definition of what the problem is. That's step 1. What are those values that you hold core to you in your moral fiber? what is the principle or the ethical principles that you're going to make the decision based on, like I just talked about. Who are our loyalties? And that ultimately leads to the decision. Here's another one. All of us, many of us may have not have looked at it in this perspective. It wasn't until later on in life that I looked at it in this perspective. You may have a personal set of ethics and you may have a professional set of ethics. But the key here is that both of those sets of ethics have an ethic of justice, care, and critique. What do I mean by that? Justice, do what is right. Care, help those who need help. Critique, speak up to those who need to be spoken up to. Stand up for what is right. Those three are bridges between personal and professional ethics. And many of us are personal and professional ethics that they blend together. These are the three connectors, so to speak. So just some general PR ethical principles that you'll see reflected in the PRSA Code of Ethics. We are to act in the public interest. Yes, we are employed by organizations, or if we're at a firm, we have clients. But you have to ask yourself, what's the greatest good for the greatest number of people? What is the greatest good for the greatest number of people? You let honesty and integrity guide you. That is critically important. My professor in graduate school all those years ago, the great Don Began, he used to say that credibility is like virginity. Once you lose it, you never get it back. And if you're not honest with that strong commitment to integrity, you're going to lose your credibility. Accuracy and truth in both communication and relationships. You'll see accuracy and truth as a theme in the PRSA Code of Ethics. And having respect for others, respect the fact that we live in America. People can have opposing views. People can have differing views. That doesn't mean we name call. That doesn't mean we insult. That doesn't mean we stoop to new lows. We recognize that we have to find common ground. We have to find common ground because something in many negotiations, something where everybody wins, something, not everything, but everybody wins something they want is better than nothing, than everybody losing. So dealing fairly with others is critically important with respect. So the idea is to accurately define what it is public relations can accomplish. You're going to see this possibly in questions on the APR exam, where you can't necessarily promise that you're going to see an increase of an awareness or an increase in the number of people who participate in a special event. You can make that an objective, that that's your goal, but you can't go in as a firm to try to get new business and say, oh, we're going to get you, 10,000 more customers. We could say our objective is to get additional customers or increase your customer base by a certain percentage, but you can't guarantee that. There's no guarantee in that. You have to maintain integrity in all communication channels, meaning that you're not telling one person something and another person something else. You have to know to safeguard confidences, of course. All of us have that responsibility. And we also have a responsibility not to damage others' reputations. We have to be concerned with our reputation, our organization's reputation. It's not about playing attack dog. And you're going to see things in the in the PRSA Code of Ethics, avoiding conflicts of interest. Critically important, avoiding conflicts of interest. What could be a conflict of interest? I was just in a meeting today, partnership with an organization doing a lot of work for us. Jake, we'd like to give you a free sweatshirt. Well, I'll gladly take a sweatshirt, but I'm going to order it on your website. I cannot take a free gift. Even though I have a partnership with you, we have a formal grant arrangement, I am not allowed to take any gifts whatsoever. Not just because of my commitment to PRSA and the PRSA Code of Ethics, but also to our own organization's Code of Ethics. So just some basic ethical practice. It's almost it's common sense. Commitment to honesty, have a sense of business ethics. I talked about I talked about the issue of a client or a vendor trying to give you something for free. Respecting others' positions, work every day to develop and strengthen trust. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, it's a commitment and a loyalty to the organization, and a loyalty and a duty to the public and the publics and the organ and the constituents your organization serves, works with, does business with, you are on the balance beam between the two. So I'm going to talk a little bit, transition a little bit into the law. And again, the APR style book is a great place to start. And a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about, you're going to think, oh my goodness, I have to go to a post-baccalaureate or postgraduate degree certificate program in law to pass the APR exam. No. You'll have these slides, and these are just some significant cases, significant Supreme Court decisions or lack thereof in some instances. These are just some significant moments in our history as a country that helped to shape free speech. And that is where public relations flows from, the Constitution and the First Amendment to free speech, because Congress cannot abridge freedom of the press, speech, the right to assemble, the petition to redress. And rights belong to people. However, corporations are considered people under the law. So what are a few of these big landmark cases? Free versus commercial speech. Several years ago, it might have been the late 80s, early 90s, time escapes me, but Nike was getting a lot of flack about the quote unquote, we'll call them labor conditions in other countries. I believe the term that was used was sweatshops. And so Nike went on an aggressive public relations campaign to combat these stories that were appearing. And basically it became a Supreme Court case where Nike claimed that it was using commercial speech. In other words, they were defending their reputation. And so basically, if you read up on the case, what happened was the Supreme Court punted. And so this is open to court interpretation to this day. Freedom of the press, all of you, this might be a refresher for all of you. New York Times versus Sullivan, which is New York City Public Safety Commissioner. He was not happy with how he was portrayed or alluded to in some advertisements that were run in the New York Times. So he sued and he lost because he was a public official. And the rules are different for public officials compared to private people. Okay. So just have a sense of the legal system. You don't have to be an expert of all of this, but just have a sense. And you can read up on this in the textbooks, the PR textbooks that are recommended. You can see some of this in the APR style guide. And of course, you could do your own research online. But administrative law, how does that apply to public relations? Federal communications rulings. You know, depending on the industry or genre in which you do public relations, the FDA may have some administrative say, some administrative law that you have to abide to as an organization. All right. For us in higher education, it's FERPA laws, information about students. You know, any of you who have college age students, you can't call your professor and ask for your daughter's grade. You can. Professor's not going to give it to you because that grade is for the student, not for the parent. I cannot release, as a professor, I can't release any information about the student unless the student gives me the right in writing to do so. So you have to know a little bit about administrative law, common law, precedents, constitutional law, this is within the courts, criminal law is made by legislatures, statutory laws made by legislatures, and then we have plaintiff, defendant, and tort law as well. So just have a general understanding, I would say, just a general understanding. I'm going to get to Oprah laws in a moment. I see that in the chat. Freedom of Information Act. This is where we get to Oprah laws. So there are, you have the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level. There are these 9 exemptions. And then you have state level open public record laws. In New Jersey, I know New Jersey because that's where I worked for most of my career. And it's applicable to us as a nonprofit organization that is funded in part by taxpayer dollars. We are subject to the open public records law in New Jersey. OPRA is the acronym. And the way it works in New Jersey is that every organization has to have an Oprah point person. And Joe Q. Public or Jane Q. Public can send a formal request, and we have the right to charge that person for whatever the cost would be to make whatever records that person wants within reason. There are a few exemptions, and the cost to mail said records. We can have a flat fee cost for that, but we have to respond within, I think the window is 7 to 9 days, something like that. There are state level open public records laws. So that's exactly as you put out in the chat, Tony, and Oprah laws in government, absolutely. And in New Jersey, it's much more restrictive. Anything that is funded by taxpayer dollars. Any organization that's funded by taxpayer dollars, whether you're a government organization or a nonprofit organization, you are subject to open public record laws. It's different from state to state. Okay, let's see if my slides will advance for me. Nope, let's try this way. There we go. So this is going to be broken down as well in the did I skip one? Let's see. I'm sorry. No, there it is. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get confused here. This is going to be broken down as well in the AP style book, and that is libel and slander. Of course, slander is written, libels, slander spoken, libel is written, slander spoken, how I remember it. And the idea is that, whoever is the slanderer or libeler, you have to prove, if you're going to file a case, you have to prove that that person was specifically intent in damaging that person's reputation. The whole reason why that comment was made is that that person was specifically intended to damage that person's reputation. I think about a good example of this was radio personality who was on for years in New York, Don Imus, maybe about 10 years ago now. 12, 13 years ago now, Don Imus, I'm not going to repeat what he said. One, I have respect for people, and two, my mother would cane me. But he made beyond negative, horribly racially insensitive, demeaning, insulting remarks about the women's basketball team at Rutgers University on air. And he probably said it trying to say a joke. Well, of course, he was taken off the air. He was fired. He was sued, but he won. He wasn't found guilty because the plaintiffs, the basketball, they weren't able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he said those things with a direct intent to damage the basketball team's reputation. So while he lost his job, he lost his millions and millions of dollars salary he was making, he lost his reputation, this, that, and the other, he didn't necessarily lose in court. Again, it's all about defaming someone's reputation. And, all of these things you have to have a check mark next to all of these things in order for it to be a win. Like if you said someone libeled against me, someone slandered against me, and you went to court with that against that person, you'd have to have a check mark next to each one of these. That person specifically tried to defame my reputation, and I am easily identifiable in this comment, and I can trace how this was communicated and prove how this was communicated, and this person acted with malice or negligence, and I have to show the judge and the jury how this injured and damaged my reputation. And most of the time, you get down to the fourth check mark here with malice or negligence, and that's where the cases are thrown out. Most of the time it gets to that, and that's where it's thrown in. It's critical to have a sense of the right to privacy. In other words, the right to be left alone. These are the gentlemen, Warren and Brandeis, who wrote this. This was the landmark legal scholarly achievement of the time in the Harvard Law Review, is that people have a right to be left alone. And it was reinforced almost 100 years later by the Privacy Act of 1974, which also not an attorney, but read up enough about this for the APR exam and knew enough about this to talk about this with you tonight in other settings. It also reaffirmed the Roe v. Wade decision in the Supreme Court, is that women have a right to privacy when it comes to their health care. They have a right. All right. But how does privacy also impact other sectors? Well, if you work in healthcare, HIPAA, privacy of patient information. I mentioned earlier, here's an acronym, FERPA, privacy of student information. So people have a right to privacy, and people's records have the right to be private. So what are some categorizations of what's privacy? So intrusion, right? If people intrude upon your privacy by sharing things, you know, that this is all defined, by the way, by William Proser in 1960. He published a piece on this. And these are really the 4 categorizations. I'll talk about them in a moment. I'll go back to intrusion in a moment. Disclosure of private facts. In other words, if someone disclosed my medical records or my student records without my consent, that's a violation of my privacy. If someone paints me in a false light, not necessarily slanders me or libels me, but paints me in a false light, that is an invasion of my privacy. That's a violation of my privacy. If I'm misappropriated in some way, shape, or form. So I think of, I had the example in my head, it was here and then it left me. But I think about if I were in a situation where we had someone at our organization who was let go, and this person went on to do something, I'll just say horrific. And so the media is doing the digging, this, that, and the other, and they find out this person used to work at my organization. The most I can say is that, yes, this person worked here from X date to this date. I can't talk about this person's personnel policy or personnel records. I can't talk about, you know, what type of projects this person worked on. I can't talk about how, oh, this guy was a nice guy, I could never see this coming. Really, the only thing I can talk about is this is when this person was employed with us, from this date to that date. That's it. That's it. Because anything else, I could be painting him in a false light. I could be intruding, even if he committed or allegedly committed some kind of horrendous act or crime. You know, there's only so much you can say before you're violating someone's privacy. Now, there are some defenses. So newsworthiness, if there's, I think about a time at TCNJ, the institution in which I teach, we had a terrible incident where one of our, trying to admit, yeah, give me a second. There we go. We had a terrible incident where there was an accident, a student passed away. And I can remember showing up to teach that night, and students came a couple weeks later. Students came into the class, and we'd already talked about this, just from a professor trying to lend support to his students who were friends with this young man. And they came in all upset. I said, "What's going on?" They said, "You never believe it, Doc. They're out there like vultures." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "They're cameras and reporters walking all over campus, sticking microphones in our faces, putting cameras in our faces, asking us to comment about this, that, and the other, asking us how does it feel." Skipped ahead here on a slide. I apologize. I'll go back to where we were.
Jacob, I'm sorry, I got knocked off and came back. Was this the student who went down the compactor? Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And so, and no offense to any of our folks on the line who are at one time in their lives like me were journalists, but one of my students, "They're vultures, Doc. They're vultures." What are you talking about? He says, "They're out there with TV cameras, and you name the television stations from the Philadelphia and New York media market. They were all there, roaming all over campus, just trying to find whoever they could to comment on their story." And, so then we had a conversation. He said, "Didn't you talk to us about PR law and privacy, this, that, and the other?" I said, "Well, first of all, it's newsworthy, number one. And number two, you had the right to say, 'I'm not talking to you,' and just walk away. And many of my students did. They were just upset that people were roaming around and there was no media command center where media were told to go to get information on a regular basis, so on and so forth. So that's an example. Another example, of course, is consent. People give consent. So for example, when it comes to college marketing, students give consent to be in brochures and websites and things of that nature when they sign their acceptance letter. There are clauses in the acceptance letter at the institutions of higher education that we have the right to utilize your image for student recruitment, enrollment, and image purposes of the institution, right? Now, most of us will have that waiver, right? We have a waiver that we ask people to sign if we're going to be doing a video recording, or if we're going to be doing a brochure or a newsletter or something. We have students and faculty and staff sign a waiver anyway, even though the students, it's in the fine print in the application or in the acceptance letter, so on and so forth. And age is an issue here, of course, because you have to have parental consent for everybody who's 18, under 18. And then, of course, if there's something that's a matter of public record, So a quick example, I shared the story the other night. I got a call one day. I'm in my office. I got a call one day from a reporter. I won't say who or what the organization was. Hi, Jake. How you doing? Hey, how you doing? What can I do for you today? And this is someone I had worked with in the past, and I thought, okay, what's the story? And before she could tell me what she says, Jake, I know how much money you make. What? How'd you get that? She says, well, you work for a nonprofit. I went online. I got the organization's 1099 form, which all nonprofits have to file with the federal government, and you make X. And, part of me was enraged, because who wants to get a phone call from someone who you might know as a professional colleague or acquaintance or a member of the media, but it's a bit of personal information. So the point of the story is that there was a nonprofit in Trenton that was using scholarship money and giving it to trustees as a compensation to be on their board, which is against the law and whatnot. If you're a nonprofit organization, you're not allowed to compensate your board, all this stuff. So anyway, her theory was, well, if it's happening at this nonprofit, it's happening in every nonprofit. I'm going to bring all these nonprofits down. So how did I handle it? I said, okay, send me an email of everything you want. I'll make copies of everything, and you can come to my office in our conference room. You pick a day and time, and we'll show you everything we got. I never heard from her again. But so I didn't even have to make her file the Oprah request. I wanted to make it as easy as possible because we were clean and I didn't have anything to hide. We didn't have anything to hide. But the point is that my salary, even to this day, is public record. If you do digging, you can find it. So no one's violating my privacy because I work at a nonprofit. So you might get some questions on copyright. I say you might, you probably will, more than likely will. So copyright, of course, is created at the moment of creation. In any publication, you have the ability to restrict it in some way, shape, or form. What does that mean? Writing, a musical composition, something dramatically constructed, play, poem, so on and so forth, picture, graphic sculpture. Yes, an idea, you can't copyright an idea. You can't copyright an operation, and you can't copyright utility objects. Is it common or statutory? We'll talk about the differences. Common exists from conception. There's no filing required. General publication limits the copyright symbol, limited, no limit as to how often you can use it. Now, if you take the extra step, which many organizations do, to file a formal copyright, it's filed with the Library of Congress. That copyright stays for 28 years. It's extended another 28 years, and heirs can inherit the rights. Why is this a timely conversation? Well, if you look, I don't know how many of you might have seen this in the news. It might be somewhat controversial, but I'll just put it this way. As a kid growing up, I was into all this. Some of you might have been as well. Been a lot of changes to Superman over the last few months. A lot of changes to Superman. Why? DC Comics, Time Warner, has lost the copyright to the original character. The copyright is not solely owned by Time Warner anymore. It's owned by, or Warner Brothers, I should say. It's owned by the heirs of one of the creators and partially owned by Warner Brothers. So a lot of changes to the character. Why? So they can continue to make toys, and games, this, that, and the other, and movies with a different iteration of the character, so they can continue to use it and not give the owners, the co-owners of the original character, their due payments for use of the character. That's why there have been changes to that character and others in that genre. So there are instances of fair use where people can use brief quotes of a copyright to evaluate or comment on a work in a scholarly fashion. The fair use analysis is there's got to be a clear-cut purpose that ties to either a scholarly article, or you're referencing something in a report, if you're a journalist, or if you're referencing something in a report as a PR writer that you're issuing on behalf of your company. There is fair use as long as you cite the source. There is a limit as to how much you can do that. So let's talk a little bit about trademark, trade name, and service mark also. What about online content? Let's see, Torian's asking a question. Torian, you want to come off mute and ask the question?
I don't know if everybody heard about the who's the bad art friend debate that was taking place recently. I know the New Yorker covered it and NPR covered it. And it was one writer posted about medical procedure. She donated a kidney, and another writer saw the post and wrote a story about the post without telling the original writer. And there was some malicious going back and forth, but the conversation has been like, who owned that story? And did the second writer who got paid to write something, did that person have the right to use her story?
Well, what's going to happen is, I mean, whether they have the right or not, I'm not an attorney nor judge, but here's probably what's going to happen. And forgive me, I'm not familiar with the story, so thank you for coming off mute to give us a quick synopsis of it. But I think what's going to happen is original owner can sue. She's going to have to prove that it's trademarked. So I don't know if it'll make it to court. Probably settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, more than likely. So there's a strong possibility there. I mean, if it were me, I would sue in a heartbeat. I would sue in a heartbeat. Now, if it was something where, but then again, it's a little different because you post something publicly, semi-publicly online, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Part of it is if you're posting something that you want to share and get likes and retweets and followers, this, that, and the other, it could be part of the game. In other words, the more followers you have, depending on the social medium that you're using, the better off you're going to be. You think about, YouTube has become a full-time job for so many people. Same with Instagram being product placement and social media influencers now, that's an actual job. So if it's part of if it's ultimately part of person A who posted the original work, and that person's goal is to not just raise awareness, but increase that person's online presence, there may not be anything that person can do about it or wants to do about it. It might be, ultimately part of what that person's trying to get to. At least that's my thought on it. Again, not being an attorney or a judge. So. Anybody else have any other thoughts on that? So trade name identifies the producer of said product. Trademark are words, names, or symbols that people visually associate. And the service mark is the text that identifies the company, product, or service. And shame on me for picking Gibson. I don't know how many of you might be musicians or guitar fans, but Gibson's suing everybody nowadays and has seen some online backlash because of it. but the Gibson guitars is known as Gibson brands. One of its many trademark logos is this one that I put, and the service mark is only a Gibson is good enough. And if you go on the Gibson website, they actually have a page that you could scroll as long as Wilt Chamberlain's arm. And he had long arms. Of all the different trade names of the different brands they own, the different trademark logos, the different service marks, the different design patents, everything's up there. And I think they made that public on their website because they just, they had issued a YouTube video that said to customers, don't buy the folks who are stealing from us, buy from us, and we're going to come after you if you're stealing from us as far as our designs, our trademarks and service marks. And they've gotten a lot of backlash from that in the guitar community. Financial PR. This is pretty important also. Many of you may have worked at a publicly traded company, and even if not, as I never worked at a publicly traded company, it's good to have a sense of this because you're going to have to know that, particularly in financial public relations, you have to timely disclose any information that's going to publicly affect the stock market price, whether it's going to increase it or decrease it. You have an obligation to publicly disclose it. Now, what counts as public disclosure? You craft a news release and you send it to PR Newswire, and it's published on PR Newswire, and you put it on your website, it's publicly disclosed. Whether the news media picks it up or not, you're not obligated there. You can't control what the news media picks up and doesn't pick up. You're going to be required to complete 10K, 10Q securities trading quarterly reports, right? And why is all of this important? Fraud and insider trading, insider information. Think about there have been numerous cases over the past several years, at least since I've been practicing PR, of those who were convicted of insider trading and insider information. And of course, I think the one that rises to the top is Martha Stewart, but she has her life back together and has TV shows and just about everything else she had before. And seems like she was convicted, she did her time, and now she's back in society, not trading stocks on insider information. All right. Something else that applies to us, particularly more on the lines of government, is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which requires anybody. I think there was someone who was, well, this was one of the cases. I don't want to talk about politics, but this is one of the cases that was in the news in the attempts, plural, to impeach the former president, was that he had people in his circle who were engaging in political activities or political type activities that were not foreign agents who were registered. Anyone who engages in political activities, and this also includes public relations. So if you're a public relations counselor for a foreign principal, foreign entity, you have to be FARFA registered, have to be. Solicits dispenses something of value and represents interest. With any U.S. government agency, any official, any across the board. Okay, so that was a very quick overview on some of the ethical and legal details to especially pay attention to. Let me stop sharing my screen somehow so I can see everybody. So that was a very quick overview of some particular things to look out for and prep yourself for the APR exam. Maybe not necessarily the APR readiness review. The readiness reviews that I've helped to facilitate as APR chair, and the ones that I've participated in as a panelist, we don't really do too much of a deep dive on, law and ethics. Candidates might get a question. Can you tell us some of the ethical implications that you went through? What were some of the things that went through your mind pertaining to A, B, and C, depending on the case that's presented? It's more so along the lines for the computer-based exam. So I'm happy to entertain any questions, comments, concerns, or any additional thoughts from those of you who are with us tonight?
So can you explain how, for example, the trademark slide may appear on the exam to identify what's a trademark, what's a service mark? That kind of
Yeah,
thing?
that's exactly it. Evan, that's exactly it. Most of
Yeah.
the questions I mentioned, most of the questions are scenario based, but in the law sections, you might get one or two that are more regurgitation of knowledge. They might give you an example. This image is so and so and so and so. Does this best describe a trademark, service mark, or this, that, and the other? And you'll have to pick the one. You might get one or two on that, and then most of them are going to be scenario based. So, and it depends. It's, in other words, Kimberly and Evan may be taking the exam on the exact same day, and you may be taking the exam in the exact same location. You're not taking the same test. Questions, and it's not like some of these academic based tests like the SAT or GRE or any of those where, depending on what you get the first few questions, the test changes, right? And it sets your score to, it's not like that. You can go through, I want to say there are like 140 questions, 170, somewhere in that's over 100, well over 100 questions on the exam. You can go through and read every question and then go back to each question. We'll talk about test taking tips. I think it's the 4th week when Kay joins us. But you can go through. And my point is, you're not taking the same exam. So you may have, of the 140 questions, 50 of them might be the same, but you might get question 3, Evan, and that question 3 for you might be question 70 for Kimberly, right? So and then you're going to have 50 of the questions that are the same, and then all the others are going to be just drawn from a whole test bank or question bank that are placed on different tests that assess the same key skill areas.
So for copyright, for the trademark, for some of these last items you covered, do you recommend a particular, I know you mentioned AP style book on libel law, but do you recommend a particular text to have at hand to study for those questions?
Libel, AP libel, and there's a list on the APR exam. I think Mike recommended the Cutlet book. That one's a good one. All of them have information. All of them that are on this list, I think there are 9 textbooks. I used to bring all 9 of them with me when we would do this in person and hold them up and show them to everybody. But all nine of them have sections on law and how it applies to public relations. And while the content may be presented in a different fashion or a different style, the content is the same. So there's really no one above the other. If you happen to have a textbook already, then go with it. And at the same time, if you hear themes from some of us throughout this, throughout these sessions, to say, go with the Cutlet textbook, and you get the Cutlet textbook, don't think, oh, I got to go get, the other 8 textbooks because I'm not satisfied with the law section here. They're all, they all have generally the same content. But I'd say one of the textbooks and definitely the AP style book. The AP style book, definitely. Any other questions, folks?
Hi, I had a question.
Hi, Marion.
So hi, regarding the editions of the books, online, I think the Cutlip one has 2 different editions, an international and another one. And some of them are a little bit older, which means they're significantly cheaper. My understanding is that they're not hugely enough different that where it's okay to get an older edition.
Exactly. I'd say anything within the last 5 years. Anything within the last 5 years. For the textbook, I'd get the most recent version of the AP style book.
Right.
And that you can get on Amazon for 16, 17 bucks. So, yeah.
Right. And if you're a PRSA member, if you get if you get the AP style book online, there is a discount for PRSA members.
Great. I did not know that. I've always gotten it through being a faculty member, so that's good.
Yep. SPJ, PRSA, I have both memberships on my account. So
Fantastic. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Yeah, I saw before the sessions and I was poking around online to see just how much the AP style book was, and I saw how much it was on Amazon. I didn't check it in the cart on the AP website to see how much it was on the AP website. But that's great that you get a discount. That's terrific. Great question, Marion. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, folks, or concerns?